We've managed to find junkyards that hold a total of 300,000 cars from a single car manufacturer, and that's not all. If you want to know where ships and planes go after becoming obsolete, then this is the list that you've been looking for. Some of these look so creepy, you wouldn't even dare to go there at night. So, here are the 10 biggest abandoned junkyards you won't believe. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Number 10. Chernobyl dump site. When the Chernobyl power plant blew up back in 1986, the Russian government and military forces mobilized every single vehicle they could find near the scene of the crime, just so they could save as many people as they possibly could. Now, this graveyard stands testament to how many vehicles and drivers had to risk their lives to save the civilian population. Rows upon rows of tanks, trucks, cars, helicopters, and all sorts of heavy machinery lay rotting in a huge junkyard just 15 miles off of the power plant. Some of the helicopters and trucks that were too radioactive had to be buried in giant and deep trenches just to stop the further contamination of the land. Russia still has to come up with a plan for dealing with the radioactive waste, but since no one came to claim them, the locals picked the trucks apart and took the engines to their homes, even though they're still radioactive. Number 9. New York City Boat Graveyard. They call it the Arthur Kill Ship Graveyard, and it's located in New York City. It has hundreds of small boats and ships rotting away in the shallow waters of Arthur Kill Waterway. Back in the 1930s, some boat enthusiasts saw a lot of old boats go to waste. That's why they started the Witt Marine Equipment Company, where they sold parts from old ships. But the owner had some crazy policies in place. You see, no one would ever dismantle the ships in the water that didn't already have a buyer. So, none of the 400 ships could be taken apart without authorization from the owner. This meant that ships would pile the waters like crazy, and one day, he decided to leave it all behind. Number 8. ROZELLE Tram Depot in Australia. Sydney was trying to catch up to the beautiful San Francisco back in the beginning of the 20th century. The metropolitan area got filled with trolleys and trams that people used for their local commute. That's why they even built the ROZELLE Tram Depot in 1904. Until 1958, the building functioned and 200 trams and trolleys were kept inside. In the decades that followed, this building became a workshop and storage facility. But ever since the year 2000, the site became renowned for smashing that like button if you haven't done so already. But no, it became famous for its graffiti. Namely, these quote-unquote artists have completely destroyed the 6 historic trams that were still kept inside the ROZELLE Tram Depot. The building itself has lost the historic charm that it once had. Number 7. KAUFDORF Car Graveyard. This giant car graveyard in the small town of KAUFDORF, Switzerland, is the work of one single man. All of these cars have been preserved, as much as possible, by the junkyard owner called Mr. Walter Messerli. Back in the 1930s, people started throwing out their used cars here in this junkyard. But there was something beautiful about old abandoned cars to Mr. Messerli, so he preserved them. How though? By getting all of the scrap parts he could find without ever damaging the exterior of the car. And while other mechanics completely destroyed any car they scrapped apart, his story was different. That's why he and his son have managed to amass the shells of approximately 1,500 old cars, spanning from the 1930s until the 2000s. Sadly, the Swiss government had ordered they all be removed from the site. Number 6. New York City Motorcycle Graveyard. If you thought the ship graveyard was the only thing that New York was home to, you'd be wrong. This one warehouse remains hidden in plain sight, and it's located on 17 Gooding Street in Lockport, New York. But the warehouse that was built in 1875 holds records of one business owner who thrived in the region. With 53,000 square feet of space, this warehouse became home to the Kohl's cycle sales back in 1970. Business was booming, but it seems like Kohl got bored selling motorcycle parts. So, he sold the building to a businessman named Frank Merle in 1998. Frank continued the business, but he would close its doors in 2007. Now, all of those vintage, old, and rusted motorcycles fill the empty space of the warehouse. Number 5. Old Car City. Quote, "I don't know what I would do if I couldn't get up every morning and look at old cars," said Walter Dean Lewis, the man who's been selling old car parts for the better part of his life. And Old Car City is the estate where he gets to satisfy his quench for the quote-unquote rusted. They call it the Old Car City, and its 32-acre estate is home to around 4,000 cars, some of which were driven by celebrities, senators, governors, and much more. Even though Walter has stopped selling parts since 2009, he still manages to make some money. He now charges $15 to look at the cars and $25 to photographers. He prides himself on saving cars that other people wanted to destroy. Number 4. The largest ship graveyard. While the city of Nouadhibou has been famous for many attractions like the Table Remarkable, the markets, and others, the thing we're interested in is the ship graveyard, located just off the town's coast. The number of small boats that have rusted over time has risen to about 300 over the years. Why though? Because the corrupt government officials accept bribes from the ship and boat owners to dock their useless vessels in the harbor. So, the once famous center for trade has become impassable and basically an attraction in the city. Number 3. Airplane Boneyard. If you thought you needed a large estate for storing 4,000 cars, how big of an estate do you think the US Air Force needs to park all of the 4,000 aircraft that are no longer operational? They call it the Boneyard, and it's visible from space. Rows upon rows of rusty and useless aircrafts have been piling up since the Second World War. But the Boneyard is now known as 309 AMARG, and don't even think about going there. This is a controlled access site, which means that you would need clearance to access this plane junkyard. It's so popular, they've even used it in Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. Number 2. Highway of Death. This is a prime example of why war is bad. While some might consider this a graveyard, this is actually the highway that connects Kuwait City with the border town of Safwan in Iraq. This is the same route that the Iraqi forces used to invade Kuwait in 1990. But that wouldn't be all the bloodshed Highway 80 would see. In 2003, when the US invaded Iraq, British and American forces marched down the highway and destroyed everything on their path. From both wars, the estimated number of vehicles that adorn both sides of the highway is somewhere around 2,700. Plus, the 1,000 people who lost their lives here gave it the name Highway of Death. Number 1. The 300,000 Volkswagen Graveyard. Now this is it, folks. It doesn't get any bigger than this, and there aren't even rusty cars here. All of these junkyards across the USA have been estimated to hold upwards of 300,000 Volkswagen cars after the so-called small incident. The German car manufacturer has paid somewhere around $7.4 billion to buy back about 300,000 vehicles. After the cheating scandal, they've been forced to recall hundreds of thousands of vehicles, and they're storing them in 37 locations across the US. Just one of the smaller parking lots holds 5,000 cars. They've been hoping that the US government would allow them to make modifications to these cars and then resell them back to customers. And on that note, we end this video. But hey, what's the largest junkyard that you've seen in your life? You can tell us in the comment section below. If you'd like more videos like these, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss any of them. And as always, thanks for watching, guys.